Hey, so again, I think I'm just going to continue on the Wives of Joseph Smith with the very first one I felt like I should talk about today, which is Emma Hell Smith. Her second husband was Bideman, but her first husband was Joseph Smith Jr. from 1827 to 1844. And so he was barely, not 22. He was just barely 21. So I think he might even been, he was technically 19 when he met her, maybe 20. And they knew each other a long time, but it was while he was employed with Mr. Stoll. And again, if you're new to my channel, I'll just preface, I am an active member of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. I do believe that Joseph Smith lived plural marriage. I don't think he lived spiritual wifery. And I do believe, according to him, and all Utah Mormons, they didn't use the word polygamy. They denounced polygamy and spiritual wifery because they thought they were the same thing. They were bad. It was free love like the 60s, and that's what, again, Cochrane taught in the 1820s. He started having literal cults, communes, and is very evil. And people were horrified by the stories of it. So to be connected to that was a horrifying thing, whereas, plural marriage, having more than one wife, was in the Bible, right? But anyway, when he met Emma Smith, it was when he was working for Mr. Stoll, who was boarding at the home of Isaac Hell at this time, that he met Emma Smith, and he immediately, according to his mother, started paying his addresses and married her. Kept it kind of simple there, but then she gives more detail in her account, which I think is really good. I love Lucy's account of the restoration. It was, January 1827 when they got married, and then it was September on the 22nd, and it had always been the 22nd of September that Joseph would go to the hill Cumorah. Yeah, it was the 22nd in 1827, and it had been since 1823 that Joseph Smith met. So we're at it's 200 years this September. Coming up on that since Joseph first saw the plates. And Joseph and Emma set out to get the plates. Finally, he had to, there's a lot of lovely stories by the family that they heard of a friend. I wish I remember the quote. I just was watch a lot of videos of the children of Joseph Smith, so I like to listen to what they have to say, and what they had to say about plural marriage and everything put my mind at ease with it. So there's a great video on Amazon Prime about the children of Joseph Smith I recommend. I'm in reading Lucy Maximus' book, her that she dictated. Anyway, but it was around midnight that Lucy Maximus, the mother of Joseph Smith, because when they got married, they moved in with Joseph Smith's family. He didn't have his own house. Like Hiram had a house because that was the house the family had been in before. Kind of like the Duggars, they sort of had some extra properties, had all these kids so they could kind of send, but they didn't have more than that, right? So Hiram got the one house, Joseph and Emma moved in, this huge family, for quite a while. But so they were newly married, living with mom and dad, sisters, so a lot of witnesses of all this. So he asked his mom that night if she had a chest with a key, and she didn't have one, and she's like freaking out. He's like, it's okay, it's fine, mom, just like calm down. I will make do. And at midnight, him and Emma took Stoll's wagon and horse, and then he did meet again with the angel Moroni and got the plates. They didn't bring him home because he didn't have anywhere safe to put it, and he didn't want anyone to see it, but he put it in a log. So she's the mother, this is her testimony, her story. She sees them leave, and then they just know that he put it somewhere, but he doesn't tell them, so they're kind of in the dark about it. And he and Emma didn't come back till past breakfast. Like Mr. Stoll was like, where is it? Where's my carriage? And then they come in, and he's like, oh look, it's there. I think it's a funny little story there. I just couldn't, I would have loved to have heard Lucy Mack Smith tell these stories. As you're hearing, you can tell she's being dictating in, probably, you know, making people laugh with some of these details. But anyway, so after this, Joseph Smith Sr., okay, that's the first, so you got Joseph Smith Jr. was the one that restored the Church of Christ Latter-day Saints, and Joseph Smith III was the son of Joseph and Emma, the firstborn son. Anyway, he was, you know, he knew, the neighbors knew, because Joseph, you know, it's just the sad thing, like, you think you can tell one person something you trust, and they just tell everyone, right? And it was supposed to be this sacred thing, and it, of course, got around, and I've been there. You have a friend you can trust, and then they're trying to ruin your life. It's not good. It's not fun. But he went to the neighbors, and he was in some house and picked up a newspaper and cracked the door, and he could hear the neighbors, and they had, you know, I won't go into details, but just some dark, messed up people that were wanted what they called the Gold Bible. Joseph's Gold Bible is what it was known as. And they just were just gonna get it. They're not afraid of him, because he was really buff and tall, and like, he did hard labor his whole life. So he was a very muscular, I guess, intimidating guy. So it was a big deal that they're like, we're not afraid of him. And his father was really tall, so that's why they said he looked like his father. Hiram was below 6 feet. So I guess not all the, like, Lucy Mack Smith was like 4'11", I heard. Really short, but Joseph Smith Sr. is really tall. So some of the kids were different heights, right? But Joseph Smith Jr. was really tall, well over 6 feet, 6'4" or 6'2", like mostly they said 6'2". Anyway, Joseph Smith Sr. approaches Emma. Joseph's working, doing hard labor again for a woman, and asks her where are the plates at, where are they, people are gonna come and get them. She says, well, I don't know, I'm sure that they're fine. And then they just convince her, like, that, you know, this isn't a sure thing, things can go wrong, you know, things, don't you know, in the Bible, like Esau, like, lost his birthright because he just, you know, Joseph could just lose all this, and he's just so, Joseph Sr. is just really worried. This is all according to Lucy Mack Smith. And so then Emma says, well, if I had a horse, I'll go get him and tell him that people are gonna try to get the plates. And they have a stray that has a hickory, I'll probably say the word wrong, wife, like, I think it's like a stick or just something not nice to the horse or your hands. But she was a really good horsewoman, and she was, I heard that it's a big deal that she was able to ride this horse. And she rode it to where Joseph was doing labor, and said, you know, your dad said this, these people are coming. He's like, and he looked, and you know, Urim and Thummim, which he did always keep on his person. But I think, like, I don't think he, you know, that was the thing, like with my photo, I think there was the impression with someone who owned the photo before me. I think he was maybe part of your organized church. I never asked, but he thought that he was wearing it, my photo, and it was just on him, not on his face, but on him, just sitting there, you know, because of that statement, I guess. So that's where that person got that idea. But he apparently did have it often on his person, but I would think, like, under his shirt, maybe just like spectacles, and he could see if the plates were safe. And he's like, well, they're safe, they're fine. He looked at it, and she's like, oh, and he's like, well, something might happen, so I'll go ahead and come home. And he's wearing she describes this long frock that he's wearing, and I researched that before, just to, like, out of curiosity. So it was a very, you know. So he went and he retrieved them, and he gave detail later on that it was just, there was bark over an old log, and he had moved it and put the plates in there and covered it with some stuff, and then got it out of there and wrapped it so no one could see what he had. He was just carrying it, and it was 3 miles, but I think he was able to walk a ways, according to Lucy. Eventually ran into a man and then started running. I don't think he ran the whole way, but once people started attacking him, you know, was that 3 miles? I don't know. Was he able to grab the bundle and throw it over his back, and then he was able to run? I think it's impossible for him to carry that, but if you look at, I think he was a very muscular, he did, but he dislocated his thumb, interesting point Lucy talked about. He's just like, had all this adrenaline. He's like, Dad, my thumb is dislocated, and he had to put it back in. So it was a pretty, he was having to fight men. He'd run and then find another man and just have to. But Hiram had a chest with a lock. And so he made sure that Hiram had that. And so Hiram was like, told Don Carlos, go get him. And they come back and they put it in there and they were able to lock it. And apparently it was very important that he have something to lock it in. But, and then they lived with the family until Emma got pregnant. And so while she was pregnant, she went home, went back to Harmony, Pennsylvania, and then just continued on with life. They had the plates, and then they got Martin Harris, to be the scribe, and I'm not gonna go the whole history. We're talking about Emma today, right? But Emma, so Emma was the scribe as Joseph dictated the Book of Mormon. And so it was the February 1879, 2 months before her death, that Joseph Smith III asked her a lot of questions about Book of Mormon and polygamy, spiritual wifery. She brings up plural marriage. The son keeps bringing up spiritual wifery. Read it. It's important. But he asked her how many children she lost. She says 3. She mentions the child that she lost in birth in 1828. And so while they were translating, right at the time, I think that Martin Harris had lost 116 pages. Around that same time, Emma gives birth and loses a baby. And she almost dies. It was her first child. And then she's pregnant with twins in 1831, and she loses the twins. And again, I'm sorry if you're curious about the story of the Restoration, you can just watch the movie The Restoration. It's a good movie. I love that movie. Or watch Emma Smith, My Story, that was put together by the descendants of Joseph Smith, and they do explain, we don't go into polygamy because this is about Emma, and we don't have journals of her, and we're going by her account. Does that make sense? So they're just talking about her life, right? But anyway, the twins in 1831, it was by April, I think they were premature. And then she adopts twins, but she loses one of those. When Joseph is beaten by the mob, he was holding, Emma was holding Julia, Joseph was holding the sick, and the sickest child was Julia, but Joseph Murdoch, Joseph Jr. was in the trundle bed, he was falling asleep. I think he was asleep, holding the baby and just trying to get the baby to be better, and he awoke to the mob, and the baby rolled on the floor and exposure. So even though Julia was the sickest, Joseph Murdoch was the healthiest, and he died really soon after the mobbing, where Joseph was beaten. According to his mother, he did die, and God sent him back to life. So, but he was just 11 months old, so really that puts it at 4 children that she lost, because it's still her child. It's adopted, but that is her child. She was able to have 4 boys, so it was Joseph III in 1832, so she loses the twins, and then and they were April and then November 1832, she has her first baby that just is healthy and fine, Joseph III. Frederick, I believe, was 1836. I did this if I'm wrong, but I think I'm remembering this right, and Alexander was 1838. And then David Hiram was in 1844. And so there were 2 children between Alexander and David Hiram Smith, that one got sick at 1 year old. The other one, I think, was just another miscarriage, I guess. So Emma notes, she's just, again, going back to her last testimony, that the scribes of the Book of Mormon were her, Oliver Cowdery, Martin Harris, and her brother Reuben Hale. I don't know, I just find these details interesting. And then he asked about Alva, and she says that he might have some, but she's she doesn't really remember. She doesn't think that he did. And then he directly asks his mother, this is his wording, about Was there a revelation on polygamy or spiritual wifery? That's what Joseph Smith III says. That's what's published in this Saints Herald. And again, he's still living in Plano, by the way. Kendall County, Illinois. My picture was printed in Newark, Kendall County, Illinois, just 10 miles away, right next to the train tracks that Emma probably took when she went and visited her sons in early 1870s for sure, and she was planning to in the 1866. It's the earliest she was planning to. We just don't. I couldn't find all the letters in the church history library. Anyway, but he's like blending, he always blends the two. And in his memoirs, he does. But you can tell he thinks he's confused. And I can tell Utahns are separating the two because he's quoting them so well. You know that they know they're not the same thing. And you know, as he writes and says, well, why are they, Vienna jockeys? Emma sounds like she's saying the same thing Vienna Jackie says, but I'll just read what she says. So he's blending the succeeding sentence, and Emma basically quickly states that there was no revelation on polygamy or spiritual wives. Okay, spiritual wifery was free love and prostituting women, as J.C. Bennett and Chauncey Higby lived it. So she tells him there were rumors of Joseph Smith living it, which is true. J.C. Bennett had rumors, Joseph Smith, he had rumors that Emma that the entire Relief Society was a prostitution ring. And she tells him that her husband assured her it was just rumors, but that plural wives, she's like, son, I'm going to go into her letters, because she even tells him once, don't hurt your brain. Like all these people being like, this is mental gymnastics. Like I'm gonna get that quote. I'm just gonna start quoting Emma. Like it's not rocket science, it's don't hurt your head here. It's just there's definitions of 3 different words. It's not that. I think at this point she's just like, well, plural marriage. She says different word. And it was a different word to Utahns. If someone said polygamy, no, not a polygamous, celestial plural marriage. So Emma uses the word plural marriage. Okay. Anyway, but yeah, Vienna Jacques, she's just saying plural celestial marriage is good, da da da, and then he's not quoting it perfectly well, but I don't think he's a liar. She's suddenly crying. Like, there's so many instances where Joseph Smith III interviews people because he studied to become a lawyer. He didn't become one, but he's interrogating them hard. Like, he's just always seems really confused why these women just keep crying. Like, he just makes so many women cry, and he's always confused about a lot of stuff. But I don't find him to be a liar, and I think it's great that his memoirs exist, and that it's not great that he did that, but it's because he's such a reliable witness to those that hate Brigham Young. And apparently now John Taylor and Willard Richards, but they like Joseph Smith III. And I'm like, well, then you trust his account in the 1860s? Because that's just 20 years later. I don't, like, Vienna Jacques did live with the Smiths too. She never married, she didn't live plural marriage, but she's saying plural marriage is good, but spiritual wifery, she's shaking and crying and saying, yeah, your mom told me if someone's living spiritual wifery, which was akin by Chauncey Higby's way of living it was raping women, just walking them home and doing whatever he wanted, and them saying no, no, no. That's what Joseph Smith killed, was outing Chauncey Higby. Anyway, so Vienna Jacques is shaking, like, it was so horrifying, the men that lived that. And you think about the women whose husbands started living that. What comfort they must have gotten from being like, okay, well, I can just hold, I think the only thing that physically happened was holding hands with Joseph Smith or maybe another man and saying, well, you can join their family in the next life. You won't be alone in eternity. You'll still have exaltation of even though your husband's a scumbag. And I'm going to go into that in a second here. But anyway, here's quoting Emma Smith's last testimony. In a chat about plural wives, he said, well, such a system might possibly be if everybody agreed to it and would behave as they should. And then you can just read what she says. She's like, well, but they wouldn't. And I think that probably just is Emma. That probably is her. She probably, because she saw men accept the teachings about celestial plural marriage, be like, okay, that's right. And then jump on the spiritual wifery train because, well, you don't have to have 50 kids with spiritual wifery. Way easier. But women are treated like, right? Women often died from the abortions. You know, I mean, Emma almost died in childbirth, but like abortions was so invasive. Think how painful, like giving birth was painful, but like it just, like, really bad. You know, just even women today, 10 years ago, telling some stories when things go wrong with the technology and the sanitation, but they didn't have sanitation back then, so you're sticking a tool. Really dangerous to stick dirty tools up people. Yeah. Anyway, but then she says again, okay, son, polygamy and spiritual wifery, she denounces it again, spiritual wifery. She's like, okay, that there was no, anyway, and it's the same, is documented in, even on the Joseph Smith papers. I don't think they have the voice of it. But the Church Historian Press has the whole account, her notes. But W.W. Phelps wrote it with Joseph Smith, where the whole church is denouncing spiritual wifery, obviously. And I showed you guys that's on the church's website, that the church, they even say the church denounced spiritual wifery, they denounce free love, but not plural marriage. She does nowhere does she denounce plural marriage. So, but yeah, denouncing trafficking women, like she was just really, yeah, I think she was traumatized from that for sure. And just all the fighting against the evil and everything. And she wanted to take care of Lucy Mack Smith. She couldn't physically, she couldn't, if you read her book, she couldn't even walk, you know, like she would have had to have been carried the whole way. Like she really probably would have died. She wouldn't have made it to Utah. And they know that. Like she was on her deathbed many times before Joseph Smith died. After her husband died, she just talks about all of her health just going way down. She couldn't get out of bed. She was bedridden before the saints left. So Emma is asked if her first husband, Joseph Smith, did he have marital relations with other women? And Emma apparently responds with, he did not have improper relations with any woman that ever came to my knowledge. So he didn't have any improper relations. But if he was married to another woman and he slept with her, is that improper? No. So the next question was, and like how many times he brings up spiritual, I'll go back and count a bit. Was there nothing about spiritual lives that you recollect? Like she already talked about it. At one time, my husband came to me and asked if I heard certain rumors about spiritual marriages. So did she really repeat herself, or did they just repeat it? I don't know. And this is October 1879. So when it's published, she is dead and gone for like 6 months. She's been gone for 6 months. So she didn't get to say, oh, edit this. No, I didn't say that. She didn't get that chance. So, but again, I never would accuse Joseph Smith III of lying. Being confused and maybe misquoting people out of his own confusion. But I think he does pretty good quoting people. I just think if we know what words mean, we're like, okay. But he's still like, what? You know, like, my brain. Don't hurt your brain. Don't hurt your brain. She says that in her letters. Anyway. Or anything of the kind. So he said, anyway, I'll read it again. Joseph Smith Jr. says, at one time my husband came to me and asked, this is Emma saying, her husband, Joseph Smith Jr., her husband, asked if there were certain rumors about spiritual marriages or anything of the kind. I'm sure that's true. And assured me that if I had, that they were without foundation and that there was no such doctrine and never should be with his knowledge or consent. Good. Free love, I don't think brings any good into the world. It's ripe today. Most people kind of live that and they just think it's funny and it's great and it's the 60s living on, and freedom. But then you get the Me Too movement, and they start realizing women have been treated so bad forever. And it was going on before the 60s in Hollywood, you know? So Joseph never supported free love, which was spiritual wifery, which is what all historians say what spiritual wifery was. And there's no evidence that the Church of Christ of Latter-day Saints, Brigham Young, John Taylor, or Willard Richards ever supported that. The men who killed Joseph Smith are William Law and Chauncey Higby and several others, but they were connected with that, and they wanted Joseph to support that. And according to the Maid of Iowa speech, Joseph's like, I'm not going to countenance. And he says spiritual wifery. Anyway, he's like, this spiritual wifery is bad. But when he says that William Law, well, he says a man, he wouldn't say who it was. Someone asked him if it was okay to have 7 wives. And whatever his answer was, well, now William Law is calling me an adulterer. Well, William Law had been excommunicated with adultery. So it seems to sort of be a pattern when someone's excommunicated for adultery to go, you're bad then, you know, well, you did this. That's why a lot of men that we're finding that are even well-known anti-Mormons find out that they're going to prostitutes and doing all this stuff, but they're so mad about polygamy, which actually, they took care of the woman if they lived it, right? Anyway, so now I'm going to go into, he does state in section 132 about, you know, him being sealed. I mean, it doesn't say this in this section, but it's clear to me that's what this explains it. Section 132, that if a woman had a husband who cheated on her, which was the case of spiritual wifery. So these men were not living plural marriage, and because these women were being passed from guy to guy, it's just a very horrible thing. And that's what Meg Stout found. She really found evidence of very likely almost all of these, you know, she would just tell the story how it was really bluntly, and a lot of these stories are kind of crass and just really, you know, it's a lot. You know, she doesn't soften things. She keeps it really blunt because, you know, her own ancestor. Anyway, so but these wives were considered innocent, and they still wanted exaltation, like I said. So being sealed to another man for eternity, for the next life, they would not have to be single, and it was maybe sort of like comforting after finding out her husband is awful. In which Meg Stout found a lot of stories about that. That's not what I'm not going to write a book like she did, but Reluctant Polygamist goes into the details of a lot of these women, and well, there's this, and then I kind of wonder that, you know, and it's not fiction. Someone tried to say it was fiction. She's like, no, it's not fiction. Like, she just makes a statement like, well, my author heart. Anyway, so section 132, verse 43. It states, and if her husband be with another woman, and he was under a vow, he hath broken his vow, and hath committed adultery. And if she hath not committed adultery, but is innocent, and hath not broken her vow, and she knoweth it, and I reveal unto you my servant Joseph, then shall you have power, by the power of my holy priesthood, to take her, and give her unto him that hath not committed adultery, but hath been faithful, for he shall be made ruler over many. So basically, any mentions of being destroyed I found were generally in 132 about being destroyed in the flesh, and connected to those that committed adultery. So adultery was always seen as a grave sin, and it's sort of like, yeah, you can make all these temple covenants and this and that, but like, you're gonna have to die in the flesh when Christ comes. So section 132, let's go to verse 50, states, behold, I have seen your sacrifices, and will forgive you all your sins. I have seen your sacrifices in obedience to that which I have told you. Go therefore and make your way for your escape, as I accepted the offering of Abraham of his son Isaac. So verily I say unto you, a commandment I give unto mine handmaid Emma Smith, your wife, whom I have given unto you, that she stay herself and partake not of that which I commanded you to offer unto her. And there's a lot of theories on that. not going to go into, but that very, yeah, that she was possibly be allowed to have someone else or something. I don't know. For I did it, saith the Lord, to prove you all, as I did Abraham, and that I might require an offering at your hand, and by covenant and sacrifice. And let mine handmaid Emma Smith receive all those who have been given unto my servant Joseph, who are virtuous and pure before me, and those who are not pure and have said they were pure shall be destroyed, saith the Lord. Meg theorizes that Emily and Eliza Partridge had called themselves spiritual wives, that she thinks Emma's, and then you go back to that last video of Eliza getting possibly pulled by like hair pulling. I don't think is, I'm sure that could have happened. Like that I would think is quite as unlikely as pushing Eliza or pregnant Eliza or Snow down the stairs. Was nuts, you know. Anyway, 53, for I am the Lord thy God, and he shall obey my voice, and I give unto my servant Joseph that he shall be made ruler over many things, for he hath been faithful over a few things, and from henceforth I will strengthen him. I command my handmaid Emma Smith to abide and cleave unto my servant Joseph and to none else. But if she not abide this commandment, she shall be destroyed, saith the Lord. And just basically she'll have like the same blessings as him if she just accepts this commandment of plural marriages, what section 132 talks about. So it's clear that Joseph, you know, had a transgression, did something wrong, and God's asking Emma to forgive him. And it's like, you forgive her, you just forgive each other. Like, there was an Abrahamic test in there at one point. And Emma was warned to basically not threaten to be with another man. It's like, yeah, like, as I'm talking about all these other people committing adultery, them being destroyed, well, you will be destroyed if you commit adultery against Joseph. Like, basically anyone that commits adultery will be destroyed, is what it says. Like, it's always been a big deal, always been really, really bad. But people that get in trouble for it, a lot of them even been on YouTube, you know, they're members of the church. They just, you know, they're kind of, when they're faithful to their spouse, they're able to kind of reconcile church history. But when they're in trouble for any degree of adultery or cheating of any degree, I mean, one woman, it just seemed like it was a small degree, so she was really mad because she didn't think it was that bad, and who knows what she did. But she just suddenly, after making a video and being like, oh, I'm trying to defend the church and loving the church, she was just so mad about polygamy, and it just took her out of the church. So, but it does appear that there's no evidence that Emma cheated on Joseph Smith. And then here's what I'm going to end with. I find really, it echoes some things, but I'll read it that other people have said. Like, again, Emma seems really consistent with other people's statements that were her close friends, right? For almost 2 decades. So Emma's last blessing, sometime shortly, it was basically after Joseph Smith was leaving for Carthage. So this is from the Joseph Smith Jr. and Emma Howell Historical Society. The descendants of Joseph Smith found a document that Emma, I'll read it though, with how they explain it is, Emma asked him for a blessing. The prophet told her he didn't have time just then to give her a blessing, but for her to write the blessing, she could, the best blessing that she could, and he would sign it when he returned. And Emma wrote the desires of her heart as a blessing from the Lord through Joseph Smith. It says, first of all, that I would crave as the richest of heaven's blessings would be wisdom from my Heavenly Father bestowed daily, so that whatever I might say, do or say, I would not look back at the close of the day with regret, nor neglect the performance of any act that would bring a blessing. I desire the Spirit of God to know and understand myself, that I might be able to overcome whatever tradition or nature that would not tend to my exaltation in the eternal world. I desire a fruitful and active mind, that I may be able to comprehend the designs of God when revealed through his servants without doubting. I desire the spirit of discernment, which is one of the blessings of the Holy Ghost. I particularly wisdom to bring up all the children that are or may be committed to my charge, in such a manner that they will be useful ornaments in the kingdom of God. Anyway, so I'm not going to read the whole thing because this has gotten pretty long, but so, and Joseph went to Carthage and the blessing was never signed. But I found Emma's statement of her desire to know and understand myself, that I may be able to overcome whatever tradition or nature that may not tend to my exaltation in the eternal world, greatly echoes the words of Eliza R. Snow's own journal entry when she married Joseph Smith. And she was trying to be at peace with it and trying to be okay with it. And she felt like her traditions and, that's what almost everyone in Utah talked about, just these traditions. And it's just sort of, it's hard to see this as a good thing, but I feel the Spirit and I feel peace about it. And for some reason, God wants us to do this. So I better do what God wants me to do. So, but yeah, Eliza R. Snow was just very dramatic though, like that her traditions were screaming at her, and it is known that her and Emma were really, really close, but Eliza R. Snow did marry Brigham Young and go off. I think it's interesting, that was very beginning of doing research, that Brigham Young, and he was upset about a lot of things, but it was interesting that he noted some pictures that Emma was not sharing with the church a ring, a family ring, and he, of course, the translation of the Bible. It was an interesting theory of one of my family members, like, the ring, was that like Brigham Young's ring, and he proposed to Emma and tried to get her to marry him, because he basically took almost all of Joseph's wives that were his plural wives as his, which to Joseph III's mind was just, well, that's just proof it's all a lie, right? So just, you'll interpret things however you want. So basically people that don't believe Joseph Smith lived plural marriage will also have told me that they don't think there's a difference between spiritual wifery and plural celestial marriage. Because I guess they think all these Utahns were living free love. I'm like, let's get that brain working. Let's just at least admit, you don't have to believe Joseph Smith lived plural marriage, but admit that those words are different. Polygamy was Utahns, according to the memoirs of President Joseph Smith III. It's on my bookshelf. I've thumbed through it for years, since 2018. They rejected that word, and there's way too many accounts that they reject the word polygamy. It wasn't just Emma, it wasn't just Joseph. They weren't calling it polygamy. So, in conclusion, Emma rejected the words polygamy, spiritual wifery, but she would bring up plural marriage. But she had her high doubts that people could live it right. And so clearly, I don't think she ever liked it. But my photograph that I believe is of Joseph Smith, that, Tegan Lucas and Machi Hindenburg in Australia, I think is likely him. They did see a lot of unique features, and they had matched. The thing that was different was because they could be explained by the mask sitting on the face, right? Wearing a vest that matches Lynn, the plural wife, Melissa Lott. She was one of the oldest plural wives. The only one that there is a secondhand account that Joseph didn't talk about his marital relations in detail, but except he did mention one story about Melissa Lott, that they did have marital relations. And in her, she talks the most lovingly about how much she just loved Emma, and they had a great relationship. So there weren't that many plural wives that said that, but Melissa was one of the last ones, and I think Emma loved her back and gave her Joseph Smith's vest. And then people that hate the idea that Joseph Smith could have accepted or lived plural marriage have started to hate my photo, I think because of that possible. They didn't say that, but because I'd already pointed that out before the paper came out to some people, part of that group, seems clear. But that vest matches really, really well. It matches. They both look brocade and have these stripes. Of course, you can't see the colors, and you can't see that but I can see the U shape. And you have to really come in and see that vest is very damaged, but there's little flowers decals, and there's this little U-shape, sort of like whatever you call it, that they throw in. I think like maybe the steamship Maid of Iowa, maybe that was handmade by Melissa. I don't know. Maybe Melissa made the vest. A lot of his plural wives made him clothes, so it looks handmade. I mean, everything was handmade, but it maybe she made that vest. Maybe he was wearing Melissa's vest in that photo. But Emma did. Melissa Law said, Emma Smith gave me Joseph Smith's vest. I think that's evidence that Emma was able to get along with one of the plural wives. It was very hard. And she definitely was not okay with if any of them said, like even in the Doctrine and Covenants, it says if they are saying they're pure but they're not, and it apparently came up as a question whether Emily or Eliza were living in. I think it turned out later they were just confused about words like everyone else. So it all, like, you think, oh yeah, because even I just kept explaining to one of my roommates the differences, and she's like, oh no, well, I mean, they did live spiritual wife. I mean, our ancestors did. Trying to argue, I'm like, no, they didn't. So that's where it just gets so confusing. Because even back then, they were confused. They were confused in the 1860s. Joseph Smith was confused. He was the son of Joseph Smith. Emma was not. Eliza R. Snow was not confused. Those are two people that really weren't. W.W. Phelps was not confused. Joseph Smith was not confused. They knew the differences between those words. And yeah, have a good day.